talk to Mesa Gifford. He's a former British volunteer fighter in Syria. He's also author of Fighting Evil, the ordinary man who went to war against ISIS. Good afternoon to you, Mesa.
Afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. We were talking to you only very recently about what's going on in Ukraine, but you were the first person I thought of I wanted to talk to you today, being on the ground. Now, tell us first of all a little bit about these rebels, this rebel leader Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, HTS. We've heard so much about. 1 minute they are Islamist, lunatic jihadists. And the next minute we're told, oh, well, they've turned the corner and now it's going to be very different and we're hoping we're going to have the UN help them build a democracy. I have a funny feeling that's a lot of wishful thinking. Who are they? Who is he? And what do you think we can expect?
Well, HTS basically is a rebrand from al-Nusra. I think in recent years, Jawlani has tried to distance himself from his extremist past, bearing in mind this is a man that many years ago was fighting against sort of British and American troops in Iraq as part of the Islamic State of Iraq. That was a precursor organization to the Islamic State. Although I have to say, as I think you mentioned earlier to a previous caller, that in Syria he joined al-Nusra and he was very much associated with al-Qaeda. So he's not associated with the Islamic State. There was actually some conflict a while ago when the Islamic State tried to incorporate al-Nusra into their organisation and they broke away.
Can I stop you here? This is all a little bit People's Front of Judea and Judea People's Front, isn't it? Because an awful lot of different organisations, more or less, all awful, all more or less awful. I think the general view seems to be al-Qaeda were the worst and then Islamic State came along and they were even worse. This guy was allied more with al-Qaeda but broke his links with al-Qaeda. But he's still a jihadist, right?
Yeah, well, does a leopard change its spots? In recent weeks, he's been talking about the diversity of Syria and his hopes for the future. This is very much him trying to, or realizing that he cannot rule Syria without Western buy-in, essentially. Yeah. And the big concern is that the extremists within his organization, despite this sudden transformation in his own personality, would not allow him to get away with this rebrand anyway.
Yeah.
But I think what really matters now is what discussions the whole of Syria have after the fall of Assad. There's a power vacuum now that needs to be filled. And I actually do think it's the right thing to do for the British government to perhaps take HTS off the anti-terror list for a while, to give them the benefit of the doubt and to seek some sort of peaceful settlements, because there are realities obviously on the ground.
Yeah. Again, if we were able to talk to them, I think a lot of people are wondering, what's it got to do with us? Well, we have a funny feeling we know what happens if we don't get involved, because we end up with 7 million Syrians fleeing and we end up with gas and chemical attacks on Syrian people, on the women and children. Apparently everyone cares desperately about in Gaza, but not when they're in Syria. But the thing about that, it's all very well us trying to work with this, but there's already talk from the likes of, Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, others of sort of working with the UN, to hopefully, set up a democratic state. Is there any likelihood, any hope, any realistic chance that we're going to see some vibrant, benign, secular democracy running Syria? Because we've seen what's happened in the Arab Spring over so many countries in North Africa and the Middle East, that actually often you go from a brutal, murderous dictator to a brutal, murderous jihadist state.
Well, that's the risk. We've got to hope for the better, obviously plan for the worst. In regards to Syria and what potential Syria might look like, one hopes that perhaps a federated Syria is possible. Syria is, after all, a very multi-ethnic, very diverse country. And if you look at the realities on the ground, the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, which is the HTS is one little fraction of, is very fractured. It's almost controlled by almost separate warlords in different areas of the country. Now, there are other groups, Assad's people, the Alawites, broadly next to the coast, will have to reorganize. The Syrian Kurds in the northeast, allies of Britain and America, also are preparing themselves. But you would hope that all these groups now, after Assad's out of the equation, could come to the table and formulate some sort of plan for Syria that is federated, that represents the different communities. It doesn't have to be a pure egalitarian, wonderful Western democracy, but if it's a peaceful society and one at ease with itself, then that's a win, I think.
Well, indeed. What were you making of so many people, apparently Syrians, queuing up at the border to return to Syria? I have to say, in that scenario, I'd be wanting to perhaps give it a few months to see how things were turning out. But also the attempts to free people from the prison camps. We've seen the prisons, particularly this one outside Damascus, where we've just seen, women, toddlers even, presumably born in captivity. So many have been held, people have been held captive for years and years. Some of them just pro-freedom activists, some will have been other political prisoners as well. But there's still some talk about how, one prison has got, 7 floors below ground of torture cells. We've seen, 500,000 people, imprisoned, murdered, the executions on a grand scale, the torture on a grand scale. But apparently they can't even get into some of these prison cells because they're locked underground, and they don't even know that all the prison officers have fled and aren't going to turn up anytime soon to help these people. How gruesome and brutal a regime was the regime run by al-Assad?
Assad and his father, it's the gangster state of Syria has existed for a very long time. They have butchered their own people. At the end of the day, they were not representative at all of the wider community. That's why the civil war broke out in 2011. They basically have butchered their people. Something like 400,000, 500,000 people have died over the last few years. They've obviously, everyone's seen the gas attacks and everything else. And a while ago, I was actually criticized for this. When I was going around Syria, you would see entire communities not only devastated by the fighting, but completely depopulated because of the mass migration that carried on over those years. I do hope that people in Syria, Syrians in Europe, will return to their homelands, because usually the people who could afford to leave were the middle classes, were their educated ones, and we really want to see Syria rebuild itself now. And that's going to involve coming up with a plan for Syria, something that is hopefully, as I said, federated, something that actually represents communities, encourage people back, and allow Syrians to work out within a security framework something that will work for them and rebuild their country.
Well, again, let's hope so. But of course, often we see, and this happened in Libya, and it's happened in Iraq and elsewhere, that often when you see these horrible murderous dictators fall, they were kind of the last wall against, frankly, some of the madness. And lots of people say, well, at least we'd rather have order of some sort, some predictability, rather than the chaos we're certainly seeing in Libya and Iraq now.
That's our fault, though. I have to say, just to quickly interject. Well, I think we've got a fundamental problem in the UK, Europe and America with weak leadership. What we need is decisiveness. We had a leader in Britain way back in 2014 when the Yazidis were surrounded on Sinjar Mountain, a decisive leader that would have gone in, destroyed the Islamic State militants that surrounded that community, rescued those thousands of people, then we would have seen many more lives saved and broken lives, at least.
But this was all post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan. This all, let's not get involved, let's not get involved. And of course, we don't get involved, and things have a funny habit of turning out bad anyway. Let me just read you a post from John Simpson, very senior figure at the BBC, highly respected correspondent. He tweeted yesterday, Bashar al-Assad has done many evil things, but he's weak rather than wicked. His family members, Iran, and especially Russia, told him what to do, and he feebly did it. In person, I found him meek and anxious to please, the reverse of the traditional dictator. I'm led to believe he was nice to his mum and made a lovely Victoria sponge as well. What do you make of that, I think, frankly, extraordinary claim?
Well, it's Assad was never supposed to take over. His older brother, I believe, died in a car accident. He is, by definition, if you look at him, the sort of chinless wonder, the meek and mild man. He certainly looks like that. And maybe he has been corrupted by his evil family and circumstance. He was pushed to lead his country by his family, by the way, not by the people, and he's had to then do the terrible things that he's done. Now, that doesn't excuse him from those terrible deeds, and he has killed, as we said before, hundreds of thousands of people.
No one pushes you to torture hundreds of thousands of people and gas children. No one makes you do that.
No, absolutely. It's he absolutely is 100% responsible for his crimes against humanity. His sponsors in Russia and Iran also share some of the guilt as well. And I just hope that with him gone, at least there is a chance. It may be a small chance, but I think there's something there. And with decisive leadership in the West, supporting the people on the ground that we know actually want a better future for Syria and will support our interests, we need to make sure we support them and get behind them.
We shall just, I think, keep everything crossed right now. Mr. Gifford, thank you so much for joining us. A former British volunteer fighter in Syria and author of Fighting Evil, the ordinary man who went to war against ISIS. Claire Pearce, I just want your reaction to what he had to say. Also, a statement that's just come out from the Prime Minister's official spokesman, PM, of course, in the Middle East on a trip somewhere else. He's always in the wrong place, isn't he, the Prime Minister? But he's always on a plane, either way. He says, asked whether the UK government was engaged in conversations with HTS, this Islamist group, through other nations. The PM's official spokesman said, we're having many conversations with regional allies. I'm not going to get into details, but our focus in all of those conversations is on ensuring a political, peaceful solution and stability in Syria and the wider region. I mean, any hope for that?
No, and it was very similar to the words I heard spouted by the Prime Minister last night. It doesn't fill you with hope. It's not very dynamic. It says nothing.
No, it really doesn't say anything like, well, we all want peace. I mean, apart from Islamic State, what they want is a caliphate. Yeah. Now, this guy in charge, he's now, we think in charge now. Yeah. He's not Islamic State, but he is a jihadist, as we've heard from previous.
He's got a bad history. He was radicalised by the 9/11 attack.
But now all of a sudden he's going to be absolutely lovely, and we're going to have,
fair, caring,
proportional
sharing
representation. That's just not what happens in these countries.
No, it really isn't, and I think people need to wake up to that fact. There are too many people thinking that this is all going to be a bed of roses.
Listen,
it really isn't.
If there's one person who can help sort this out, two people indeed who can help sort this out, it's Keir Starmer and David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary. I have absolutely every confidence that these are the two men who've absolutely going to know their stuff and really be able to deal with these Islamist fundamentalists. I think we all agree on that, surely.
I think they would love that statement on a poster. Julia says,
100%
wins them all the elections
my faith,
ever.
Mr. Lammy, all my faith. God help everybody.